generation and the externalities in the power system. Now, moving along, we haven't got as much time as we originally had, so some of the slides I won't go into depth because we have an exercise at the end of the day, which I think is more important than listening to me telling you about theories. So the agenda is the same. We have a very short introduction to the idea of environmental impact assessments and strategic environmental impact assessments, a short discussion on externalities, and a case study on the regulation of sulfur emissions in Denmark. And then we move on to which will form the basis of the exercise we're going to do this afternoon, which is an interactive calculator for determining socio-economic costs of power generation. And I'll give you a short introduction to how this works, and then you can use the internet on your computers to develop an idea of the socio-economic costs related to power generation in your countries of origin or in the regions you come from. Short introduction to what I do. I work with eia energy analysis along with Michael and Annas and Paul from yesterday. And the projects that I'm working on at present are mostly in South Africa. I don't have any previous work in East Africa. We work as the special advisor to the National Treasury of South Africa on energy issues, energy policy, mostly focused on the renewable energy programs they're trying to develop. We're helping them with bilateral agreements with IPPs in neighboring states, mostly Mozambique at present. General regulation and planning on restructuring their power system, and a lot of help with grid integration and system planning, giving them assistance in developing new policy and negotiating with the monopoly ESCOM. We, on the other hand, also work for ESCOM. I've been helping them as a technical advisor and doing some training with ESCOM along with eia15.wmv. We have a team that works in South Africa as well, and then I also have been helping the German development agency GIZ develop their energy program in South Africa. And another thing I work with quite extensively is the International Energy Agency Wind Task 26, cost of wind power. So that's what I do. And today I'm going to talk to you about environmental impacts of energy generation. And yesterday when I was here, I just saw that the Environmental Committee exists, and there were a few issues that were mentioned by them. The one was that one wanted to have an adequate, affordable and sustainable power supply was one of the comments I picked up on the EIA's intentions, and then the optimal utilization of the potential in the region with incurring the negative possible, with a minimum negative environmental impact of harvesting the resources one has in East Africa. So this presentation will be connected to those comments that I picked up yesterday in the presentations. So if we just look at a simple, it is a requirement in all EU countries, and generally in most countries, I'm sure it is in most of the member countries of EIA as well, that one has to do some form of environmental impact assessment when developing a project, and especially a major infrastructural project. This is pretty much a standard procedure, and my experience so far is that generally Africa and the African countries I've worked in and the European countries that I've had experience with generally have a more or less similar environmental impact assessment procedure, whereby you go screening and scoping and eventually ending in a public debate or public participation, and then a decision being issued. And the whole idea behind environmental impact assessments is to ensure that the environmental implications of infrastructure projects are taken into account before final investment decisions are made. And this is to ensure that the sustainability issues are included in the investment decisions.
Please.
Yes.
I would like you to explain in fact what's meant by environmental impacts. Does it mean emission of SO2 and CO2 only, or we may another larger view? For example, if you cover if you remove some forests, is this an environmental impact or not?
Yes. There's any influence that the project will have on an ecosystem or on the environment as a whole. And that includes people as well, generally, the way people. So if you, for example, have a project whereby you will change the water table of farmlands or something like that, that is an environmental impact that has a negative effect on the people who own those farmlands, for example. Or if you are flooding a valley, that obviously has an influence on the environment of that valley.
You take into consideration only local or national?
Generally, these will be taken on a national level, as it's...
Or it's international point of view, because you may not affect something in your country, but affect in another place.
Yeah. This is, we'll come to the next slide where you'll get a better idea of that. And this is something where the European Union policy has determined, or the EU requires all the policy issues, policy decisions and laws and programs must have what they call a strategic environmental impact assessment. And this is generally being developed because the feeling was that if you wait until the investment decision on an infrastructure project before you start including the environmental issues, you will get too far down the road before realizing that a project is unsustainable. So rather, when you are determining the policy or the plan or the program that will result in these infrastructure projects, rather take an overall view of how your policy will influence sustainability and the environment, so that one has an idea of what one's going into right from the start. And this is a sort of integrated planning way of looking at the environment and including it in all the political decisions that are made. And that, for example, starts including more international issues, and especially issues such as, one has a theory that, or generally organizational theory within environmental management, is that you must rather have the authority closest to the actual environmental event must be the decision-making body, because you want to get that the people who are most affected by it have the most influence on the decision. But of course, one has the administrative boundaries, and those are ultimately national boundaries. So if you are changing the flow of a river that crosses a border into another country, obviously your national decision has an influence on that, on the other country, but there's no administrative overlap between those two. So this idea of having strategic environmental impact assessment is to try and include that type of impact on in the decision-making process. Yes.
Yes. For going on what you said, the EIA is then embedded in the pre-feasibility study because it can be a sunk cost for a project.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, your EIA is taken before your. You have to receive your letter of approval or a record of decision, or depending what they're called in various countries, before you can actually start building a project. And usually often one will get some kind of, a decision will be made with certain requirements being placed on the project. That if you want this approval is on the condition of that you fulfill certain requirements, and those requirements must be fulfilled if you intend to continue with the investment.
Conditions precedent.
Yeah. So let's move. With this strategic way of looking at things would be, for example, if you're developing a policy in East Africa that you think there should be more interconnectors in the country, between neighboring countries, and that this will promote investments in certain regions because they have whatever it may be, hydro or the good coal resources or gas resources, whatever it is in these countries, that the decision of interconnecting all the countries to try and optimize investments will have some form of environmental impact on all the countries. So this should be considered that what are the actual influences of this, and is it something, and how can we try and make this as sustainable as possible within the economic rationale of the East African Power Pool, for example.
Excuse me.
Yes.
What about the criteria? If there is any criteria list to judge this, there is positive or negative impacts from this environmental impact assessment?
Well, one generally would have some form of technical experts would then be employed by the project. For example, doing an environmental impact assessment, you would employ technical experts to give you an evaluation of the effects of the project, and then it's up to the administration to determine whether those effects are acceptable within the environmental laws of the country. I mean, there are lists for different countries, but and also the EU requirements, but they are determined by lawmakers in that country what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. So it's a local issue, really.
I just want to be clear between the strategic environmental impact assessment and the normal EIA, say in East Africa, Power Pool, we have a 25 years master plan.
Yeah.
And we expect that specific EIA will be conducted prior to the implementation of each power plant or interconnect that's indicated in the master plan. As we talk about this strategic environmental assessment, how do we apply that in our master plan? How do we integrate it? Shall we wait and see what each project will be?
I would, using the strategic impact assessment, one would then look at your master plan and say, I mean, when I looked at a master plan, a strategic environmental impact assessment, this is a very high level assessment of trying to identify which problems may arise when we get down to the environmental impact assessment level. So that you're sort of saying, well, there's no point in having a master plan if we find our master plan isn't going to be able to be carried out because we've actually identified that these 4 of the environmental impact assessments will never ever be approved because they are going through natural resources that are of great importance for one of the member countries. So one takes a very much an overview of, this is our master plan, what are the potential environmental impacts of carrying out this master plan, and where could problems arise. Because I mean, what happens with your master plan is it's just a computer telling you, you want an interconnector here, and you want an interconnector there, and then you must build this, and you must build that. But it's not saying, well, where is that interconnector actually going to be? It doesn't see that. So one should then have a strategic assessment to see, is it actually realistic to have, if one has, I mean, many of the member countries of the East African Power Pool, their natural resources are one of their major incomes for the countries, through tourism or through whatever else it may be, and it would be unacceptable for local communities and for politicians in these countries that these resources or sources of income should be compromised by building an interconnector through a national park or what it may be. So if you in your strategic assessment identify that these areas, there will not be interconnectors, for example, between Kenya and Ethiopia in these areas because they are of strategic environmental importance and economic importance for the country. Therefore, they actually should go this way around, or they should be somewhere else. Then one starts getting an idea of, let's make a plan that is also can be realized when we get to the environmental impact assessment phase.
So where is the difference between the normal